Welcome to another edition of Cranky Gun Reviews. This is part 4 in my 410 shotgun slug testing series, and this is the teardown, actually taking the shells apart, looking at the wads and the powder. And I know you're thinking he's probably wrung this chamois for all it's worth, but realistically, I'm just trying to get the most up-to-date and the most complete information available for Buckeye Ballistics and for anybody else that's interested. Starting off first with the Brenneke, we've already seen the slug. The wad is kind of a mirror image wad that has cups on both ends and a little bit of cushion in the middle. And the powder is a European style flake powder. Actually very colorful, red and green squares. Looks like confetti that was chopped out of one large block. Not sure how they manufacture it, but I've seen this in a lot of foreign slugs. Next up is the American Tactical, and as I've shown you before, the wad is directly attached to the slug. I think it stays on it as it travels downrange, and the powder is just some generic looking flake powder. No idea what it is, but looks pretty standard to what you see with a lot of American shells. Next up is the Sterling slug, and again, I focused a little bit on the slug itself because it has these really cool flutes that are cut into it. The wad is a standard, looks like a mirror image type wad with cups on both ends and a little bit of a cushion in the center. And then again, we see that European style looking square cut powder, similar to what's in the Brenneke, but not quite the same because the color of this powder is very different. But again, I think the flake powder is really cool. Next up is the AGC Ammo slug. And again, the slug itself on this one is kind of unique. The lines on it are not rifled. The front of it kind of looks like a Phillips head screwdriver and it has a very narrow but deep cavity on the back of it. The wad has a deep cup where the powder goes in and a shallower cup on the top end with some cushion in the middle. And again, just looks like some generic flake powder that you could see from many different manufacturers. I have no idea who makes their powder. The Federal slug I actually had to cut apart because the wad was so long it was jammed in the shell. So knowing that these hulls tend to split when you shoot them anyway, I figured I'd just cut it out. You have your standard rifled slug, a very tall wad with a lot of cushion built into it, and some ball powder. Next up we have the BPS Red slug, and again this slug looks very similar to what you'd find in a Winchester Super X. It has a cushion wad with a cup on the bottom, again some ball powder. It almost looks like pistol powder like H110 or Winchester 296, but I have no idea what they use. And then moving on to the BPS Green slug, again very similar slug to the BPS Red. The wad is identical to the BPS Red, has a little bit of cushion in the middle, and the powder actually looks different. This is flake powder instead of being ball powder. So the red and the green BPS do have different powder in them as well, which may attribute to some of the changes in how they react. Now coming up on the Remington slug, this one is very different. This basically has the powder with a very small piece of cardboard in there as a wad, and then a whole bunch of white buffer in there, and then the slug is just dropped right on top of the buffer. So that buffer acts to take up the spare space. Now the last three slugs I have here are all very similar. The Winchester Super X slug has the powder in the bottom, a very short double-ended wad, then a whole bunch of buffer material that actually looks like the media that you use to tumble brass shells before you reload them. So it almost looks like some organic material like corn cob or something like that that's ground up and placed on top of that lower wad. Then you have a cardboard wad stack that's about 1/4 of an inch tall with your slug on top of that. Now moving on to the herders, this looks exactly identical to the Winchester Super X 2.5 inch shell. The powder looks similar. Again, it could be 296 powder, I'm not sure, but it's a very small spherical powder, a short double-ended wad. Then you have all of that organic looking buffer material on top of the wad with a short 1/4 inch stack on top of the buffer material, and then your slug placed on top. And lastly, we have the 3-inch Winchester Super X, which for all intent and purposes looks exactly like the 2.5 inch Super X and the herders, except there's a lot more buffer material in the middle to take up that 1/2 inch difference in the shell length. So there you have it. So I think that's going to do it for this series of testing the 410 slugs. Found out a lot of good information. Some things were a little bit surprising. I am going to reload the slugs back into some shells and take them out and shoot them, although I don't expect much out of them because some of the slugs I mangled up a little bit, and with reloading them and stuff like that and repacking the powder back into the shells, you never know what you're going to get. So thanks for watching this series on 410 slugs. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. God bless America. Support your 2A rights. Get out there and shoot, and make sure to remind someone if they ask you to give up some of your freedom for the greater good. Freedom is the greater good.